looks like we are streaming. I've got all these notifications on my screen.
Should be streaming.
Great. Well, we're going to continue an informal conversation today with a few of the pastors from the park. Like I said, we're going to bring other people in down the road, but today we've got Kyle Eisenhower, Mike DeFries, and Chris Nickel. And so a couple things we want to cover today. We're going to talk a little bit about soul care in the middle of what we've been going through. We also want to talk about the state of the church a little bit more, and just some personal reflections and some thoughts, as well as discussing an article that Andy Stanley, or an interview with Andy Stanley that several of us read that we thought was really interesting, and talking about the church for the rest of 2020. And so, but let's just start off with a quick check-in with the other participants. And, I'd love to hear how you guys are doing, what's going on in your world right now. I can start and just say I've had several phone calls and meetings this week with people, and I think what I'm seeing now is that there are financial sectors that are being officially dramatically impacted by this. I think originally there was a sort of like we're going to get through this, everything's going to be fine, nothing's going to change for us. But our friends that are in commercial real estate, especially like leasing kind of real estate, are being dramatically impacted now. Our congregants that are physicians that do elective surgeries are being dramatically impacted. And I mean, most of those folks' stories are, we were doing really well, and this is it's a hard time. It's not like the end of the world, but we're just starting to see that across the board. And I had a long conversation with somebody yesterday that was really impactful to me, just to reset on just how dramatic this is in some areas and in some different industries. And then it's weird because I talked to somebody else and they're like, everything's fine, we're just good. Like, still getting paid, still doing my job, just doing it at home, and it's nothing's changed. So I think for me, the weight of where we are as a church community and congregation was sitting in a little bit more for me. I really feeling like I understood some more stories as I've been talking with people this week. And I'd love to have more of those conversations to hear where folks are at.
Yeah, I think for me, with that same vein, Scott, like in the education world, we've all got lots of friends who are teachers, administrators, and man, the anxiety level's high, right? I mean, different districts trying to pursue different pathways. They're all struggling through that, all trying to do what's good and right and healthy. And then parents, all of us on this call, we're all parents and affected by where do we put our kids for school, and, or what's homeschooling with the schools, or what's a virtual, learning environment's going to be like. And I think as a church, we're trying to figure out, Terry Pease in particular has really been asking a lot of good questions around how can the church try to step into that space and be a resource. We don't know, but that's a question that we're asking. But I'm just feeling it for parents, for teachers who want to teach, who want to be with their kids, but also don't want to, get sick or get anybody else sick. And so, yeah, I'm kind of feeling that weight today. I actually, had a missional community group meeting last night, and lots of our folks who are in that group are teachers, and I could just feel it through the screen as they were sharing kind of how they're processing all of it. So I think that quote unquote industry is for sure having to tackle some really, really big questions right now, and just feeling it for them. So.
Yeah, kind of piggyback on that, not to get too far into where we're going to talk later, I think. But I think even us as a church have been trying to figure out what that looks like for us as things have, keep extending where we're not able to gather physically. And so that's been this thing we're doing right now, where we're trying to connect, and some other things we've been launching have been, I think they've been refreshing and hopefully there are things that are finding resounding connection for people. But it's still waiting through that. Like, what does it mean to be faithfully present with people online, which is just feels so counter to what we say all the time about how being physically present and embodied with people is really important. I don't think we've stopped believing that. That's something that's really important to us. But at the same time, we're trying to be super wise about what we do and finding in this season what we can do. And so, of course, that's where my mind's at quite often with trying to worry about, there's a statement that we've used at the park for a long time. We say that it's excellence, not extravagance, where we want to do things well, things that are intentional to kind of help people in their walk and to challenge them and to lead them through just being faithful people and to, start realigning hearts. And so the question is, how do we do that digitally? And that's, it's been like a dream of mine to really dive deep into how do we disciple people digitally, right? And I've had this on a list of trying to figure out, and then all of a sudden we're crashed into how do we do that? And I've really been, a lot of studies I've been reading with Barna and everything speak about just the number of people who go to church who have, during this time of pandemic and isolation, have just not even watched or tuned in to their church. And, I think some of that's a good thing. That sounds funny, that it's sort of a calling of the faithful, but also in mourning the idea of so many people who are being disconnected from the church and who may not come back, at least not in the same way, whatever it looks like on the other side. And so, despite all our ways of trying to connect, there's a lot of people who are not fans of Facebook, or maybe there's technologically, they don't get how to connect in these certain sort of mediums. And so, I've really been wrestling with that lately. How are we faithful digitally when we can't be physically present?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the big things that's just been on my calendar, so I've been thinking a lot about it a lot, is people who are getting married right now or planning to. And I know a few of us have done some weddings over the past couple months, and as beautiful and sweet as a very, very, very small wedding is, there's also just a hint of mourning that grandparents can't be there, or friends, or just kind of this big party has, I don't want to say been robbed, but it's this weird thing that people are trying to navigate, whether to get married now or wait, or have a super small ceremony and then plan something different later. And just a weird time for that. And then also just talking with people who are single that are living on their own, and or with a couple of roommates, and just a weird dynamic of isolation, apart from family, and just working from home or losing their jobs. And just not to be a super downer here, but I do think that there's I think, Scott, something you said of there's this like initial push of like, okay, we're going to figure this out, we're going to get through it. And now it's like, oh my gosh, when is this going to end? And it's almost like a new wave of, some of that anxiety and stress just building up the longer that this goes.
Well, let's just keep talking. We can talk state of the church right now, and then we can kind of do soul care in a little bit. But I think it hit me this week that we're in. I mean, I think Kyle talked about last week the apocalyptic times, and try to define that to understand apocalypse is not necessarily talking about the revelation end of all days. It's the change of all things is kind of what apocalyptic means. It's like it's something dramatic happens and things are different after, and that's the time and the season that we're living in is this kind of apocalyptic time. And I think that's been really sitting in on me. I posted something on Facebook this week linking to this Andy Stanley article, and I made a comment on Facebook about how this, maybe the most significant pivot in the last 1,000 years of the church, or last 400 years. This is not like a Martin Luther Reformation type pivot. It's a different type of pivot, but it is, even Luther's pivot affected like kind of affected the world, but also didn't affect a lot of the church. And this is, I mean, this has affected almost every church in the world. And I think it's speaking to a reality of, like Kyle was talking about, people disengaging. It's speaking to a reality that the church has been on fairly shaky ground for quite some time. If your way of defining health is like attendance, if it's church attendance is the way you define church being healthy, which I'm up for everybody for other definitions of that, and maybe we'll find that. But if people going to church means the church is healthy, it's been on shaky ground for a long, long time. And what we're seeing and what we've seen in Europe for the last 100 years is dramatic decline in the church. Where I have a friend who's a church planner in Northern Ireland, and I mean, the city just gave him a church, like this gigantic, beautiful old church, because it's just empty and it's owned by the state and it's supposed to be used for a church, which is another conversation. But there is a resurgence of church planting movements happening in kind of Western Europe, but it's slow and movemental, and it feels like we kind of got fast forwarded to that really quickly here, of going, whoa, wait. And just one more thought, and then I'll love to hear everybody else's points. But I shared with our staff this week that for the last 25 years of my life, I've stood at a door every week and greeted people to some type of worship service, whether it was a youth service, a 20-something service, shout out to Eastgate, or or CBC when I worked there on Sunday mornings, or the park for the last 10 years. I mean, the way I have kept my finger on the pulse of our community is by being able to smile and greet someone at the door, and not being able to do that. And I would imagine most pastors in America feel this way, or in the world, without being able to have that touch point, which is, in my mind, even more important than preaching. It's just the ability to look and see, I see you. I'm glad you're here. You're welcome in this place. Without having that touch point, it's really hard to know where your congregation's at. It's really hard. And, we've done one survey. I guess we could do a survey every week, but people might have survey fatigue. It's a lot more challenging this season just to know how people are doing. So I think Andy Stanley said, I'm calling it for the year. We're not going to be together until 2021. I'm not saying the park is doing that, just for the record. We were going to start meeting on July 12th, and then that clearly didn't happen. And it felt like the wrong thing to do. And then we've got, we have some tentative August plans. But I think when we talk about the church reopening, please don't hear me say that we're going to jam 600 people in a room that seats 600 people. I think if the park is able to, or does reopen, it's probably going to be, like most people, it'll be 15% of our normal church attendance in a room that seats 100 times that amount of people. So, it will be safe and everything else. But again, we have no date right now. We're just struggling with when the right time to do that is. And we're praying week to week. So that was a ton of stuff. So what are your thoughts, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, it was so interesting. I felt like a thing that was brought up in that Andy Stanley article, which I'll post on the comments on Facebook and YouTube here in a little bit, is that he said that they are looking at the resources they were having to put out. Now, North Point, where he is at in Atlanta area, is a gigantic church. So their resources for putting on a service are significantly more than ours at the park. Like, they're putting in a whole lot of money and staff hours and time in order for people to gather on a Sunday. And he was saying, from stats that I've heard and I've read, that it's anywhere from 10 to 20% of people are even showing up. So I have a friend at a church in town who's a worship leader, and he told me that they're doing 2 services in an auditorium that seats 800, and they're having about 75 people per service. And they're still putting all this effort in. Now, what's helpful is they're also live streaming, so that's still kind of filling that other need. But the question is, are those resources best used trying to put on a service when it's really not it's not going to be a thing that most people are going to come and engage in. And then Scott, that thing you're talking about seeing people face to face, that's been stripped away even in this context. My dad's a pastor in Florida. My mom was telling me out the way, an older church, the way they've been gathering since Father's Day, and that no one gets a chance to talk to each other. They're ushered in, they're ushered out, they're sitting on opposite ends of pew, on opposite rows, wearing masks, and that no one's like having face-to-face talk or contact. There's no really checking in with one another. I think there's probably something that feels great about being in a room like that together. I really long for that, but there's also something that says, is this wise, or are we just making some sort of emotional decision at this point to force ourselves to gather together in a room? And I don't know that answer, but that's really been hitting me, and that hit me a little bit from that article that Andy wrote.
Yeah, I would just say
interview.
Yeah, I would just add to that I think the really interesting, I guess, invitation for the church right now is like into discernment. We've had conversations around like, if the governor or the mayor would just ban it, then it's like, it would kind of make the choice for us, which that's like easier. And I know we have some of that now of like no groups bigger than 10 and things like that. But I also feel like, how we engage our church and how we engage our neighborhoods is still really open to us. And that's where the creativity, I think, can come in right now. But that's still so hard. I was just talking to my wife this morning about just, missing people. Scott, you mentioned just being able to take that pulse of people coming through the door. I mean, my recent history is, our Mac Terrace parish planted, a year ago, like right now, basically. And, being able to be in a room together, being able to give hugs as people walked in, and, not being able to do that. Yeah, it does feel very untethered. Like who is our church? Who are the people that we're connected to right now? But that discernment invitation, I feel like, is like very much a little bit like feeling around in the dark. But I feel like that's where the hope is like that there's something new and creative that we can, and probably multiple new and creative things that we can do. So I think that's what I really love right now about the park, is that we're having a lot of those conversations, as much of a struggle as it is and as it feels like. So
Yeah, for sure. I'm certainly longing to be together, and I think we at the park have made it a point to not make Sunday morning the end all be all. And so I think in many ways I don't think anyone's prepared for this at all, but I think in many ways we're not, it's just a good opportunity for us to refocus in on, okay, we don't have this opportunity anymore. What were the things that were beneficial about that? And how do we still try to do that through streaming and all of this? But really getting into discipleship and evangelism of, I think, well, I know that a lot of that is still happening on the discipleship end with our missional communities and discipleship corps meeting. And then I think from an evangelism viewpoint with actually reaching your neighbors, a lot of the feedback I've heard is, and we're all sitting out front and talking to each other across the street in ways that we never did when our lives were moving a million miles an hour. And so, I think with what Andy Stanley was saying, I saw Kyle just posted the link, but one of the things that he was saying is that in-person services for them weren't missional or evangelistic unless the mission of the church is to gather in a building on a Sunday. And, I feel like that's a pretty strong statement there of, what is the mission of the church in this season, or should it be? And kind of going back to your Reformation point, Scott, of, the point is not to gather a crowd on a Sunday morning as the end all be all, that it is this sending harbor. And I think I'm really missing that of seeing people checking in, and as well as, just having that communal feel of, okay, we're here to worship, we're here to encourage each other, we're here to pray, hear from the Lord, and then we are then sent out on mission. And yeah, I think, it's such a difficult time to be a pastor where you don't have that finger on the pulse, where you don't have that opportunity to engage so many people at one time, to kind of get a feel where people are at and where you might be needed. And so it's a real challenge that I think that we're all feeling, and that every person across the world who's a Christian is probably feeling, of just that responsibility for other people, and not quite being able to minister in the way that we want to. So that's kind of where I'm at with it all.
That's a great point, Mike. It's like it's forcing the church to reconsider what is, what are we really about, and what's important. And gathering and meeting together is important, but we've always said that it is a discipling, it is sending. I think for pastors, whether they admit it or not, they're one of their top 2 to 3 metrics of success or effectiveness is church attendance. So that easily becomes an idol, and it has in my life for sure, at times. And there's some people take it to an extreme, and others, I think like we've had this kind of organic sense of numbers for the whole time that we've been doing this, where it's more or less like we know there's 500 seats in the room and it looked like about half full. But man, I mean, that was one of our metrics of like effectiveness. And, and giving is another metric of effectiveness, like people financially supporting, kind of means they're like on board with what's going on and where you're heading. And that becomes an idol as well. So, and in the one hand, like we're smashing those idols because people are giving less across the board to churches and people are attending less. So on the one hand, for pastors that had idols that were worshiping those things, they're being smashed. But on the other hand, for pastors that had a healthier relationship to that, it's just, we don't know are we supposed to, is it Facebook likes, or, are we being effective? Again, I was with somebody yesterday and this guy was really broken up. And I was like, how do I not know this? Like, how did I not know you were this messed up? And he's like, man, we've just disengaged from everything. We're just done. We're just done with everything. And I'm like, and this is a young, level-headed professional, father of 2. And just, I thought, man, I don't know the state of where we're at right now. I don't know how hard people are hurting. And it's really challenging.
Yeah, something we've talked about, and I think everybody knows, is like we are created to be highly relational. And so that desire to just can it, to like, okay, forget it all, to disengage, I think is one, perfectly normal and natural, because there's a physiological effect to, and just an emotional effect to not being able to connect with people. And digital is great, but it's not the same. And so I think we're wanting to press on. I think, Scott, at the end of the service this past week, there was a really good exhortation to like looking ahead and moving forward. And I think that's where we should be. But I think there's a little bit of like calling people out of the dark a little bit, of like, there is a way forward, and let's figure it out together. But it's hard. I mean, I've had conversations like that too, of just, man, we just feel like we're done, like, no, let's stay in our house and let's just be a family and let's just close out the world and
day drink.
And let's get our groceries delivered, because God bless those people, because they're at work and they'll bring us our Honey Nut Cheerios, and so everything will be fine with our kids because of that. So yeah, I think that's a very normal, pretty pervasive attitude that's out there. And I think we all have shared that at some point or another, of just wanting to disengage and be done with it, so.
Yeah, I think we're finding that the thing we preach so much about priesthood of all believers, that we think that everyone has been called and has a calling to be a leader and a priest in the church, is we're kind of like having to rely on that, right? We don't have the resources or the ability to really connect and check in with everyone in our church, no matter how much we try. And we do, we like try and have all these systems and structures to check in with everyone and regularly find how people are doing. And really we have to just rely on, community groups and people who, have friends that they know have come to church, or acquaintances or neighbors. And we have to rely on our church being the church to one another. Really, I think that's the way that we're seeing, which has been beautiful. But also the problem is there's also cracks that we can't see at the same time. So I think we're feeling the combination of like the beautiful reality of the priesthood of all believers in our church congregation, how people are serving one another and reaching out to one another, but also just all these cracks that we're just not, there's things we can't see, things we don't know. So it's like, pastorally, how do we care for people that we don't know have a problem? Like you said, Scott, someone that you would imagine would be fine comes and tells you that they're having problems, and that's probably all over the place. And digitally is not the best way to reach out to someone and say, hey, I'm not doing okay. And I wish we had more opportunity for that. So it is an interesting tension that we're in. It'll be interesting on the other side of this, whatever that is, to see what sort of fruit that bears. What sort of communities were formed as a result of people having to take ownership of a certain block in their neighborhood, or having to take ownership of their community group in ways they never had to before. I'm really interested in see and hopeful that will do something for our church and for the church in general, where they'll start reimagining and really seeing that the church can't be the church without each person living into their calling.
Yeah, that's really good. I think, this conversation is really dovetailing into this pastoral care and how we address anxiety and stress. And so I might preach for a little bit. So just Kyle, mute me if I'm going too long. But I had never really struggled with anxiety or depression up until last summer. There were just a lot of situations with some of my extended family and just different things just personally going on that I just had a really bad place with anxiety. And it wasn't until it probably lasted a few months. And it wasn't until I talked with Scott a little bit about what was going on. And he asked me, what are you afraid of? And I broke down. I had never really linked together fear and anxiety before. I mean, I know that like in my head, but in my heart, it just hadn't connected. And so some of these like deep fears just started to come out. And I think right now, every person on earth is having to face those fears of, loss of income or death of family members, or the normal that we once had is no longer there. And, one of the verses that I think is really powerful, which I want to just talk about a little bit and would love to get y'all's wisdom and thoughts on this, but Philippians 4:6-7, I'm sure we've all heard it a million times if you grew up in the church, but it says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And so, we're in this time of uncertainty, and Paul's writing this letter to the Philippians from jail. So his circumstances are not great, and they're facing a lot of persecution, a lot of inward quarreling, just really not a good situation at all. And Paul's telling them, don't be anxious about anything. And, I think in the way I typically handle that is I just kind of white knuckle it, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be anxious. Like if an anxious thought comes, I'm just going to block it out. I'm not going to deal with it. And then he kind of lays out this pattern of how we're supposed to do it. And in this commentary by Moises Silva on Philippians, he talks about Paul's theme of just rejoicing in this whole book as the antidote to anxiety, this joy. And so not joy from our circumstances, which is really just happiness, but this joy in who God is, who does not change. Our circumstances change, everything changes except for God. And then he says that we bring these anxieties, these fears, these doubts to God with a grateful heart of thankfulness for who he is and what he's done for us. And that then, when I'm faced with anxiety, as I'm sure a lot of people, how they try to deal with it is we try to reason, we try to work harder, we try to figure it out intellectually, and get a plan together. And right now, just as we've been talking about church stuff or life stuff, like every plan we make, it's like, oh, can't do that, or oh, we started this, now that doesn't work, or and it's just constantly intellectually challenging, and we can't quite figure out the right way to move forward. And what Paul says is to bring those to God with a grateful heart, and then he gives us peace that transcends understanding. It transcends our intellect. For Paul, he had this peace and joy that transcended his jail cell. And so I think that is like a foundation, and I could go on and on about all of this, but I think those are some really good starting points for us, is to have joy in who God is, to actually pray about our anxiety. A lot of times when I can't fall asleep, I just think a ton, and I don't always start with prayer and bringing those things to God, laying them at his feet, asking for that peace. And another thing that Paul talks about, obviously Jesus talks about too, is to look at other people and how we might serve them, kind of what you're talking about, Kyle, with the priesthood of all believers, of where true joy oftentimes is found in picking our head up and looking outside of ourselves, looking to our neighbor, looking to our family, looking to people that we go to church with, and hey, how can I serve you here? How can I write you a note or send you a Grubhub gift card or whatever? Just small ways where we're able to find joy in serving and joining with what God's doing. And again, this isn't that we're ignoring our anxiety or not addressing these things, but that we're actually bringing them to the Lord. We're bringing them to our community, and asking for assistance. So I'd love y'all's thoughts. And then we have a few resources that we've collaborated on as a church that I want to share, but would love just kind of y'all's thoughts on that passage and how you guys have personally walked through that.
Something that I think can be really helpful in this season is to adopt some new healthy rhythms, engage in some things that you haven't done before. I think actually Ashley Powell is on here, and I just a shout out to Ashley and to John Wynn and Jason Todd, and I think Spencer Anderwald and a few others have been, they started a youth group. It's the first youth group the park has had. And we were planning to launch it after spring break and in person, and it crashed and burned, obviously, because COVID crashed and burned so many things. And but they just took it online, and they've done two things that I thought have just been really beautiful. One is they have a Zoom deal at 1:00 on Sundays, and the teenagers, kind of pre-teenagers, get on there, and they do kind of, I think, more like a traditional Bible study. My son Chase is in that range, and so as is Parker Eisenhower and a handful of others. But the thing that I think they've done that's been really beautiful is at 8:00 every night they have a psalm reading, and a bunch of middle schoolers and late elementary kids are getting onto a Zoom call, and they're just reading a psalm together. It takes 5 minutes, and then they usually play Minecraft after that for 2 hours. But
yeah, I just had to point out they were mentioning that they've been doing one psalm a day since this started, and they'll be on Psalm 119 on this coming Sunday, which we know is 154 verses. And they're like, we're going to do it. We're going to do the whole thing, just starting early. Like they're not making any. So that tells you how long we've been in quarantine, how many psalms they've gone through.
So I think that's a great example of I know it feels overwhelming to consider a rhythm right now, but I also think that by committing to that is where you start finding health. And so it's the day you decide to start the diet. It's the day you decide to start restricting your alcohol intake. It's the day that you decide to spend time reading. It's those moments. That's where we start feeling like we're moving over the hump, like we're getting into something new and a new normal. And so, ever since the quarantine started, I've been going hard on, we bought a Peloton bike, and I'm like 195 something days in every day. Even sometimes it's like a 10-minute thing, but I'm just keeping those rhythms going. And for me, it's been early morning prayers on the back porch. And it's like the first couple months of this deal, I didn't do that. And the first couple months of this deal, I'm waking up and I'm like languishing and watching Netflix and not knowing what the heck I'm going to do. And, you know, like, and then God just said, man, pray. You just need to pray. So I have, and for me, like, I really like structured rhythm. So it's like, I get up around the same time every day, mostly before the sun rises. I make an espresso. I go sit on my back porch. I light a candle and I pray and I listen to worship music. And so it's like, I really love the structures of those things. And I think that can be really helpful in the season of committing to some new things and just saying, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. We're about to finish this house project. And as soon as it's done, I can't wait to just re-engage reading every day and being focused on time and reading. I've got a million books I'm supposed to read for classes. And so I'm really looking forward to getting back to that. But I think that might be one of those things. What are your rhythms looking like? And how can you establish those things to help you feel like you're getting kind of into a new normal?
Yeah, Mike, I love that passage. And I think for the Nickel family, you know, for us, it's meant, I think, reinvigorating some rhythms that we've gotten out of the habit on that were really good and healthy. So some of it might mean not kind of reinventing a wheel, but kind of coming back to one that's just stopped turning, you know? So for us, that's meant like at dinner time, like at the table, not like at the couch, like everybody kind of doing their own thing and eating, but like coming back to the dinner table, turning the TV off, putting our phones down. And actually what that passage later, I think like the next verse talks about thinking about the right things. So like your commentary on the thought life, I think is huge in this. So we've been asking our boys, like just like the last 2 days, like we just restarted this. What was good today? What beautiful thing did you see today? What was lovely today? And then we talk about those things, or at least we try to, with a almost 7-year-old and a 4.5-year-old. But I have personally found that to be life-giving, even in a little bit of the chaos. Like that's been super helpful, was to come back to a rhythm. And for me, it's thinking about the right things, because I can easily let my thinking go to chaos and the world is ending and, you know, yada yada yada. So just encourage people too. It might just mean coming back to something familiar that you know works and that was truly like really good, healthy rhythms for you. So that's one thing that I would put in there on thinking and engaging your kiddos on, even helping them. I think kids are feeling this really significantly. So helping them think about good things and focus their brains on good things is really helpful right now. So,
yeah, I was going to mention a rhythm I've been doing and participating much of this time with my kids, mostly in the mornings with Caroline, because she's the one who's up early. The boys have adopted a sleep-in stance at this point. And so it's this book. It's called Every Moment Holy. In it, essentially, it's got a bunch of prayers and liturgies that I think are just really beautiful. Prayer life is such an interesting thing in that I grew up where it was weird for there to be a read prayer or anything. You know, every prayer had to be. Sorry, my phone's ringing. I didn't mute it. Every prayer had to be like, you had to come up with it and pray really deeply. And of course, I'd get really good at those. But this has some beautiful prayers. And so one of them for me has been getting up early and making my coffee with my daughter, Caroline. See, I'm the nerdy one who like has show and tell pictures. So we would get up and make a Chemex. And I think this somehow works better when you do a slow pour method, just because it's like long and a drawn out process. And there's something just special about pouring hot water over coffee beans and smelling it. And so, sorry, I had to show a cute picture of Caroline. But the book, it has this prayer. It's called The Ritual of Morning Coffee. It's just a short prayer about, essentially about, at this new day, release me from my fears and bring me to the next moment. And it's just been this daily liturgy that has been super important for me personally to be able to just kind of recenter and a pattern of getting my heart in the right spot. Also, my last show and tell thing really quick is that, as Scott was talking about the youth group thing, they have official park logo hats. We've gone the whole time of the park without any kind of logo merch, but John
How do I get one of those?
happen.
How do I get one? Oh my gosh.
I don't know. You got to you got to get in the youth group, I guess. So thought I'd have to point that one out. Now everyone's going to be asking John for a logo hat, I'm sure.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you guys for sharing. I think those are super helpful thoughts. And, you know, I do think the rhythm thing is super important and is something that, for me, yeah, I was kind of living like a college dude early on, of staying up too late watching TV and trying to sleep as long as I could, so that I could avoid my children as long as I could, which is just not healthy. But yeah, pour over and prayer and worship music has kind of saved the day. So a couple of things, maybe I'll try to figure out how to share these in the Facebook comments, but we have some videos that we have created with one of the counselors in our community. Her name is Jordan. So there's several videos on our website, theparksa.org/resources. And there are just some great videos on how to deal with stress and anxiety, dealing with loss and grieving, and just different ways to kind of apply these, not only spiritual practices, but just emotional health and mental health, offered free from a licensed professional counselor. So really encourage you to go check those videos out. There's also several resources. There's websites called griefshare.org. There's a link for AA San Antonio. As we know, substance abuse has gone way up during COVID, betterhelp.com, and then faithfulcounseling.com. So there's different websites you can go to. Also, the four of us, any park staff person, is here for you. We'd love for you to reach out to us so that we can point you in the right direction, or just for us to be that provision for you. We also have a list of counselors that we'd be happy to refer you to, as well as just our community, what we've been talking about, that we are here for you. We want to be. And if you're kind of overwhelmed by choices or selections, we can provide you guys with simple, even just spiritual practices of centering prayer, or different, prayer books that we can refer you to, scripture reading plans, things like that. So please use us. We'd love to be a resource.
Mike, another thought on that is, I think there's one more emotion I want to just touch base on, and we can kind of wrap this thing up. But we've talked about anxiety, we've talked about being overwhelmed, but I think the other thing we need to just face is just anger. People are just mad. I mean, just angry. And I've seen that side of some people. And I think there's something to say too, that like, if you feel like you've got like pent up kind of rage and you're angry, it's really easy to turn that on everybody else, right? It's the church isn't doing it right. It's the government isn't doing it right. And I really encourage you to tap that feeling, even to the point of like really do a deep dive on what you're angry about. There's an awesome book from Andy Stanley. I can't remember what it's called. He changed the title on it. It used to be called It Came From Within. But I highly recommend this book. And it talks about where anxiety comes from, where anger comes from, where coveting comes from. And like, but you made an invitation for the pastors of our community to talk with people. One of the things I think might be happening is that there's this pent up, like silent sort of passive aggressive rage going on, and people are fearful just to vent. And I think it's really good to vent. And so one of my jokes for the last decade of the park is I tend to be the complaint department. So if anybody's not happy, they usually call me. And I found it to be really healing to let people vent and just be like, I'm angry about this, I'm angry about that. Because, I mean, I can't speak to the government exactly. I don't really know I guess they have our best interest in heart. I don't really know one way or the other. But I can tell you that like churches and pastors, like nobody, you know, from what I know of the large community of pastors I've been, nobody's at home like twirling their mustache trying to figure out how to disenfranchise their church or make people angry, or it's just the nature of this. It's the nature of things, and we are mourning the loss of regular things that we could do, that we are being told we can no longer do, and it's just overflowing a lot of people. And maybe Christians, maybe you're afraid to just say you're just mad, you're just angry. But I think that can be really healing. That is the process of lament is the outward expression of inward angst, and it's joining others in the outward. It's the wailing at a funeral. It's not the passive aggressive, give myself a stomach ulcer. It's the just bring it and let it go. And some of us are easier at that than others. But I think that's just another emotion that people are struggling with. And like, I get it. I totally get it. And I think there's a place in the church for that. And for people to be honest about it. You know, so well, I think we probably should wrap up. If there's any, I don't know if we have any kind of closing thoughts, but I do want to mention some rhythms. We started last night. Mike and Kyle and John McDonald led us in worship in prayer. And so we're going to be doing that again, I think next Wednesday at 8:30. And my wife and I jumped on, and it was a really nice time of worship. I'm looking forward to that, more of that. We'll continue on this. If you have any questions you want us to answer, Chris said, is this the end of the world? So if you want us to answer that question, we can. You just email us at questions@theparksa.org. And then we do have our services that we'll be live streaming on Sunday mornings. And we are putting a lot of energy and effort into that. And really want you to track along with this story of the life of David. And so I'm going to be preaching this Sunday, and it has there's a really dramatic impact on where we're at right now. And it's a definite cultural commentary and reference to where we're at with the relationship of Christianity and to the state, and so to government. So I'm excited to jump in. So any closing thoughts from anybody else before we tune off out? Yeah.
I would just add another new thing we just started this past week was our park lobby. So about 45 minutes before service on Sundays, we're just opening up a Zoom room. I think you can find more information about that just through the park's website and our Facebook, but just a chance to literally just jump on, say hey, and wave to folks. Did that this past week, and yeah, it was a very eclectic kind of group of folks, but it was like really great to just be able to say hi and hear kind of what people have been up to the past week. So jump on, even if it's just for 5 minutes, you jump in, say hey, and then get ready for the service at 10. So
awesome. Okay, well, thanks for joining us on our little Facebook Live. So we'll see you guys Sunday, next Wednesday, next Thursday, and reach out if you have any questions. All right, thanks, guys.